Some cars were so strange, so flawed, or so ahead of their time. They were practically erased from the history books. Buckle up as we revisit 20 American cars the automakers would rather you forget ever existed. The Chevrolet Vega. They said it was the future. What we got instead was a masterclass in how to botch a promising idea with almost surgical precision. Enter the Chevrolet Vega, a car that looked sleek in brochures and disintegrated in reality. Launched during the 1970s fuel crunch, the Vega was GM's shiny featherweight answer to rising gas prices and the Japanese invasion. On paper, it had all the right notes: compact, affordable, vaguely sporty. For young buyers, it whispered dreams of freedom wrapped in a stylish metal shell. But by 40,000 miles, that shell started to look like Swiss cheese. Rust didn't nibble, it devoured. Owners peeled back floor mats and saw sunlight where there shouldn't be any. The sheet metal was so thin, you'd think GM forged it out of soda cans. And then came the aluminum block engine, a supposed marvel of lightweight engineering that couldn't handle heat. Overheating, warped heads, and spontaneous mechanical drama became the Vega's tragic symphony. One former owner joked that he got to know his mechanic better than some of his in-laws. That about sums it up. In the end, the Vega wasn't just a flawed car, it was a warning label on wheels. Proof that cost-cutting and ambition don't always mix. A car designed to lead the compact revolution, but mostly just led people straight to the service bay. The Chevrolet Monte Carlo, 1970s. It looked like a muscle car, until you stepped on the gas and realized you'd just woken up a very stylish couch. That was the Monte Carlo experience in the mid-1970s. Big attitude on the outside, soft whispers on the inside. Chevy dressed it to impress. A sweeping hood, chrome accents wide enough to signal passing aircraft, and body lines that practically begged for admiration at every red light. It screamed power, but mumbled compromise the moment you put it in drive. One buyer, still starry-eyed from the showroom lights, thought he was signing up for a street brawler in a tuxedo. What he got was more of a ballroom dancer with arthritis. The car had presence, no doubt. But performance? Well, that got left behind somewhere between the oil embargo and smog regulations. The engines were choked, the curb weight was heroic, and braking felt more like negotiating with gravity than actually slowing down. Still, there were things to love, like the ride. It floated like a cloud and hugged nothing. The seats were less bucket, more recliner. Road trips? Glorious. Cornering? Forget it. In the end, the Monte Carlo was the automotive equivalent of dating someone gorgeous who bored you to tears. Beautiful, composed, even elegant. But when you wanted passion, it just stared back, politely sipping gas. The AMC Gremlin. What happens when you take a sensible, compact car design, saw off the trunk, and send it straight to market without asking a second opinion? You get the AMC Gremlin, a car so odd, it somehow crossed the line into being endearing. Almost. Born into the chaos of the early 70s fuel crisis, the Gremlin was AMC's budget-friendly swing at the small car boom. And swing is right. It landed like a punchline with fenders. With its sloped rear, chopped-off back end, and aggressively awkward stance, it looked like a Hot Wheels prototype that escaped the drawing board. But for a lot of folks, including one guy who bought a '72 model fresh off the lot, it was their first real car. It was cheap, nimble, and surprisingly zippy with the optional inline-six. Parking was a breeze, gas mileage was solid, and it even had enough torque to embarrass heavier cars. Briefly. Then came the rust. Not just rust, structural disintegration. Floors went soft, panels bubbled, and entire rocker panels vanished like they had a death wish. Add to that an interior that rattled like a bingo cage, and mechanical systems that treated reliability as optional, and the charm wore off quick. Still, people remember it. Not fondly maybe, But they remember, and that counts for something. The 1971 Ford Maverick. It looked like a Mustang that had skipped leg day. With its long hood, short rear deck, and fast backish profile, the '71 Ford Maverick gave off just enough attitude to make you think it might bite, until you actually drove it. I picked mine up because I was broke and optimistic. It promised sporty style on a blue-collar budget, and that sounded just right. Under the hood was an inline-six that could get you across town, assuming you weren't in too much of a hurry. It was reliable, sure, but about as thrilling as a washing machine on spin cycle. Acceleration? Mostly noise. Wind resistance felt like a second braking system, and if you dared challenge traffic at a red light, you'd better have had a head start and a prayer. But I'll give it this. Ford nailed the design. From a distance, it looked sharp. With enough squinting, you could almost believe it was a muscle car. Just don't look too close. The rust showed up early and spread like gossip. Fenders, rockers, paint. None of it stood a chance. Still, it was simple, easy to fix, cheap to own. Just not the kind of car you tell stories about, unless you're laughing. And yeah, I sold it. No regrets. No nostalgia. Just relief. What's the strangest car you've ever driven or ridden in? Share your story in the comments. The 1958 Edsel Pacer. Few cars have managed to look like they were trying to land on the moon and sell groceries at the same time. But the Edsel Pacer pulled it off. One glance at that infamous horse-collar grille, and you knew you were dealing with something that didn't come from the usual Detroit blueprint. Ford had big dreams with this one. The Pacer wasn't just another car. It was a whole new brand meant to sit somewhere between Mercury and Lincoln, and maybe steal a few Cadillac buyers while it was at it. With its space-age dashboard, push-button drive controls, and oversized ambitions, it promised a driving experience no one would forget. Unfortunately, people didn't forget for all the wrong reasons. The public just wasn't ready for a car that looked like a rolling appliance catalog. Sales tanked, jokes spread, and the Edsel quickly earned a reputation as one of the biggest flops in auto history. But here's the twist. It was actually a solid car underneath the awkward flair. Smooth ride, decent power, and comfort for days. These days, the same Pacer that once drew laughs now turns heads at car shows. Timing might have doomed it in '58, but hindsight made it a cult classic, with a price tag to prove it. The Ford Pinto. What do you get when you mix cost-cutting with a poorly placed gas tank and call it innovation? Apparently, a bestseller, at least for a while. Rolling into the market during an era of oil shocks and economic strain, the Pinto positioned itself as the practical American answer to rising gas prices. It was compact, light on fuel, and just affordable enough to tempt young buyers and tight-budgeted families alike. For a while, it seemed like Ford had cracked the code for a modern, efficient ride. But beneath the thriftiness and tidy design lurked a danger no one expected in a grocery getter. That rear-mounted fuel tank, tucked too close to the bumper, had a catastrophic weakness. A minor rear-end collision could ignite the car like a matchbook. And while Ford had every opportunity to fix it, they didn't. The cost of retooling was deemed too high, so they gambled with consumer safety, and the backlash was brutal. The Pinto became synonymous with failure, not for poor performance, but for what it symbolized. A car built for saving money became a lesson in what happens when saving lives isn't part of the calculation. Owners didn't just trade them in, they distanced themselves. What was once America's fuel-efficient darling now exists mainly as a warning from history. The Ford Mustang II. Some cars were born to run, others were born to comply. The Mustang II? It felt like it was born to apologize. By 1974, the dream of roaring muscle cars was sputtering under the weight of smog rules, sky-high gas prices, and insurance rates that could bankrupt a teenager. Ford pivoted hard, shrinking the once wild Mustang into something that could sip fuel, meet regulations, and maybe still turn heads, if you squinted from far away. Sure, it had the name. It even had a few visual cues, a long hood, rally stripes, and if you dressed it up just right, it sort of looked the part. But the magic was gone under the hood. The 302 V8, once a beast, felt like it had been tamed with tranquilizers. The exhaust note promised more than the throttle could deliver. Handling was soft, vague, and never inspired confidence. It wasn't so much a pony car as it was a commuter in pony car drag. One former owner put it best: "I bought a Mustang, but it never felt like one." Looking back, the Mustang II did exactly what Ford needed at the time. But for purists, it became the Mustang that flinched, a relic of a moment when survival outranked speed. The Chevrolet Corvair. Slapping a rear engine into an American family car was either a stroke of genius or the opening scene of a cautionary tale. And with the Corvair, it turned out to be both. Chevy's oddball creation from 1960 was supposed to shake up the status quo. No V8 Thunder, no oversized chrome ornaments, just a sleek, low-slung body and a flat-six air-cooled engine mounted in the back like something from Stuttgart. It was the anti-Detroit car, a quiet rebellion on four wheels. And early on, it actually worked. Enthusiasts were drawn to the Corvair's graceful lines, whisper-quiet ride, and sporty handling. At lower speeds, it felt nimble. But above 60 miles per hour, especially in a tight corner, the rear suspension liked to improvise. Drivers sometimes felt like they were guiding a well-dressed eel on roller skates. Then Ralph Nader crashed the party, figuratively and all too literally. His book, Unsafe at Any Speed, exposed the Corvair's rear suspension quirks, and overnight the car became a poster child for automotive recklessness. GM made improvements, but the press and public trust never recovered. Today, the Corvair is remembered not just as a car, but as a cultural pivot point, part engineering experiment, part corporate facepalm. Fascinating, flawed, and unforgettable, even if not always for the right reasons. The 1975 Ford Torino Elite. Ever wonder what would happen if a muscle car and a living room couch had a baby, then sent it off to finishing school? That was the Ford Torino Elite. From the outside, it had the full 1970s glam package, opera windows, vinyl roof, and a chrome-heavy front end that looked like it belonged in a car commercial narrated by a man with a velvet voice. It oozed flash and suburban prestige, even if the price tag said otherwise. Slide inside, and you were greeted by wall-to-wall comfort, plush bench seats, faux wood stretching across a dashboard the size of a pool table, and doors that closed with a satisfying thud. It wasn't built to be thrown into curves. It was built for gliding down boulevards with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the door. The 351 Windsor 5.8 gave it some promise on paper, but the reality was choked by smog controls and detuned power. Merging onto highways felt more like easing in than launching forward, and the 3-speed automatic transmission took its time thinking things through. As for fuel efficiency, this car practically drank premium for breakfast. But none of that dulled the affection I had for it. It was a soft-spoken heavyweight, dignified in its own clumsy way, a boulevard cruiser with more charisma than common sense. The 1972 Mercury Montego. Every generation has that one car you didn't realize mattered, until it was gone and gas was $5 a gallon. The Montego was never meant to win drag races or grace magazine covers. It stood tall with quiet confidence, wrapped in a deep green finish and a grille that looked like it belonged on a courthouse lawn. It wasn't flashy, but it didn't need to be. It was honest steel, shaped with purpose. Step inside, and you were met with simplicity done right. The seats had that sofa-like sprawl, the steering wheel had real girth, and the dashboard had enough faux wood to furnish a small cabin. It was the kind of car where road trips felt natural and unhurried. The 302 V8 under the hood didn't rush the experience. Acceleration arrived with calm assurance, and sharp turns were met with gentle persuasion rather than force. You adjusted your pace, not the car's. Sure, it burned fuel like it was going out of style, and parallel parking was more event than task. But what the Montego lacked in glamour, it made up for in grit. Years later, when I spotted one gleaming at a car show, it wasn't nostalgia, it was recognition. That unassuming Mercury had stayed the course, long after the flashier names had faded. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, hit that like button and stick around. There's a lot more where that came from. The 1968 Dodge Dart. If cars were people, the '68 Dart would be the quiet guy at the party. Never flashy, never loud, but always the one who helped you move on the weekend and never asked for gas money. It didn't need bold stripes, fat tires, or a thunderous exhaust to prove its worth. The Dart made its case with consistency. Mine came with the 273 V8, modest by muscle car standards, but surprisingly spry and endlessly dependable. It started every morning like it was happy to see you and never made a fuss about bad weather or long commutes. Design-wise, it was all squared edges and practical proportions, like someone built it with a T-square and a sense of responsibility. The cabin didn't overwhelm you with features, but everything worked, and it aged gracefully. On the road, it leaned toward comfort over corner carving. The suspension was soft, the steering relaxed, and the whole driving experience felt like the automotive equivalent of wearing sneakers instead of dress shoes. I eventually traded it in for something newer, something with more flash. But over time, I found myself missing the Dart's honesty. In a world that's always selling you more than it delivers, that old Dodge was a rare kind of truth. Steady, simple, and exactly what it claimed to be. The Chrysler Airflow. How do you crash and burn with a car that predicted the future? Easy. Release it before the world is ready and make it too smart for its own good. That was the tragic tale of the Chrysler Airflow, a car so streamlined, so obsessively engineered, it might as well have arrived in a time machine. In 1934, when every other car looked like a rolling phone booth, Chrysler dared to sculpt something out of the future. They tested it in a wind tunnel when nobody else even knew what a wind tunnel was for. They moved the engine forward, balanced the weight, and shaped the body to glide rather than plow through the air. But instead of praise, they got panic. The public wasn't asking for a revolution. They wanted running boards, fender gaps, and upright grills. Not a space-age sled with headlights tucked inside the body. Rumors of weak frames didn't help. And once the ugly label stuck, the Airflow's fate was sealed. Today, collectors call it a misunderstood masterpiece. Restored examples float down the road with eerie quietness, reminding us that brilliance sometimes arrives before its time. And when it does, the world tends to look the other way. Datsun 200 SX. Designers must have blinked twice before stamping the final approval, because the Datsun 200 SX looked less like a sporty coupe and more like someone tried drawing a car from memory while wearing mittens. In the glory days of the 240Z and the beloved 510, Datsun had momentum. Then came this awkward cousin, angular in all the wrong places, underwhelming from every angle. The front grille had all the flair of a budget electric razor, while the slab-sided body screamed, "Wind tunnel testing not required." On paper, it ticked the boxes: rear-wheel drive, 2.0-liter engine, 5-speed manual. But behind the wheel, reality set in. Acceleration was more suggestion than statement. The steering felt numb, the suspension soft, and driving it spiritedly was like pushing a shopping cart full of bricks uphill. Rust didn't wait for old age either. Paint flaked like autumn leaves, and trim loosened on its own schedule. Build quality felt optional. Within a few short years, many 200SXs had already begun their quiet return to the earth. While the 70s were filled with risky design swings and wild experimentation, the 2000 SX made the bold decision to aim low and still miss. It wasn't just forgettable, it redefined how dull could still be disappointing. Leata Cabalero. Every so often, someone looks at a budget car and thinks, you know what this needs? A tuxedo made out of fiberglass and regret. That's exactly how the Leata Cabalero was born. Donald E. Steinbach, a dreamer from Post Falls, Idaho, took the modest Chevy Chevette, already no one's idea of a masterpiece, and gave it a makeover so outrageous it bordered on performance art. Using Bondo, resin, and an imagination untethered by restraint, he stretched the nose, added Monte Carlo-ish curves, and somehow made a compact car look both longer and less useful. The result wasn't just peculiar, it was confusing. Like someone tried to design a luxury car after reading about one in a poorly translated comic book. Steinbach wasn't deterred. He built nearly 100 of these wild creations, even dabbling in pickup versions that resembled El Caminos drawn from memory. The price tag doubled that of the Chevette it was based on, which might explain why sales didn't exactly soar. But the Caballero wasn't just a commercial misfire. It was a monument to misguided ambition, a rolling reminder that in the world of car design, bold doesn't always mean beautiful, and excess doesn't guarantee success. Bricklin SV-1. Built for safety? Or built for escape artists with a sense of humor? The Bricklin SV-1 rolled onto the scene like a rejected Batmobile prototype. Gull-wing doors, plastic body panels, and all the engineering finesse of a group project gone rogue. Malcolm Bricklin, the man who brought America the Yugo and the Subaru 360, somehow decided his next act should be a sports car wrapped in fiberglass and fueled by blind optimism. From a distance, it looked futuristic, maybe even exotic, but up close, the illusion fell apart fast. The bumpers resembled melted Lego bricks, the turbine wheels screamed disco fever, and those slit-like windows? More submarine porthole than performance coupe. Mechanically, the SV-1 was chaos on wheels. Body panels warped just sitting in the sun. The gull-wing doors, which were supposed to be the showpiece, often refused to open, unless gravity or a friend with a crowbar intervened. And the electrical system? Best described as an open invitation to spontaneous combustion. In the end, the SV-1 became a cult classic for all the wrong reasons. It didn't revolutionize the car world, but it sure gave it a story worth telling, if only for the laughs. Do you think any of these cars were unfairly judged, or did they earn their bad reputations? Buick Riviera. Design trends can be cruel, but Buick in 1970 took it personally. What had once been a sleek, commanding personal luxury coupe suddenly looked like it had been left too close to a bonfire and started drooping under the pressure. Just a year earlier, the Riviera stood proud, long hood, crisp lines, and that hidden headlight coolness that whispered confidence without shouting. Then the redesign arrived, dragging behind it an identity crisis dressed in chrome. The front grille looked like it was slipping off its mounts. The rear fender skirts resembled something grown in a damp basement, and the stance lost its edge in a puddle of bloated curves. This wasn't a bold reinvention. It was a misstep in slow motion. Buyers took one look and walked away. Sales sank, and Buick was left cleaning up a mess that felt both embarrassing and entirely avoidable. The Riviera had gone from muscle luxury icon to something that belonged in a retirement brochure. Mercifully, Buick found its way back a year later with the infamous boat-tail model. Not everyone loved it, but at least it had some guts. The 1970 Riviera, on the other hand, was a beautiful mistake. Minus the beauty. Ford Thunderbird. Trying too hard to look tough? That's exactly what the 1970 Ford Thunderbird did when it ditched its sleek, suave roots and strutted into showrooms wearing a massive chrome beak. The nose wasn't just big, it was theatrical. Like the designers confused muscle car with costume party. From certain angles, it looked more like a Pelican on wheels than a personal luxury coupe. The T-Birds of the late 60s had that cool, effortless vibe. They didn't scream for attention, they earned it. But this version, it practically begged you to notice, and not for the right reasons. The elongated front, mismatched rear proportions, and awkward stance made it feel like two different cars bolted together after an argument. Underneath the flare was still a capable car, sure, but the styling distracted from everything else. Buyers weren't quite sure what they were getting: muscle, luxury, or low-budget sci-fi prop. While sales didn't nosedive overnight, the design choices planted the seeds of decline. The Thunderbird's quiet confidence was gone, replaced by a clumsy swagger it never quite shook off. Volvo 262C. A luxury coupe shouldn't feel like a punishment for having a spine, but that's exactly what Volvo delivered with the 262C, a car born from an identity crisis dressed in Italian tailoring. Inspired by the swaggering presence of American land yachts like the Lincoln Continental Mark V, Volvo wanted to create a Scandinavian answer to Detroit's rolling lounges. The result wasn't quite that. Instead, they took the upright, respectable 262 GL, shipped it off to Bertone in Italy, and had them slice nearly 3 inches off the roof. What came back was a two-door that looked like it was wearing a top hat 2 sizes too small. The roofline squatted so low, it seemed the car was apologizing for existing. Inside, the trimmings tried their best. Plush leather, fine wood, hints of European luxury. But none of it could erase the visual tension outside. The car looked pressed, as though the design department had lost a bet and decided to commit fully to the consequences. Yet, against all odds, Volvo sold more than 6,000 of them. Because apparently, if you offer enough leather and Swedish engineering, some buyers won't mind craning their necks for the privilege. Oldsmobile Cutlass Aeroback. Of all the ways to bring European flair to American driveways, slapping a droopy fastback onto a mid-size Oldsmobile probably wasn't the winning ticket. But that's exactly what the folks at GM did with the Cutlass Aeroback, a car that looked less like a sleek import and more like a sedan caught mid-slide off a hot plate. In their rush to mimic hatchback trends without actually committing to a hatchback, they birthed something that wasn't quite a fastback, wasn't really a coupe, and absolutely wasn't what anyone asked for. It had a standard trunk, sure, but from the curb, it fooled nobody. The awkward slope drew puzzled glances and even more puzzled sales figures. Customers didn't flock, they fled. GM's decision to skip a conventional sedan at launch didn't help. By the time they course-corrected with a more traditional roofline, the damage was already done. The two-door Aeroback awkwardly limped along until 81, like a failed experiment someone forgot to cancel. Today, it serves as a perfect reminder that good intentions mean little if the execution leaves people wondering whether they're looking at progress or a design prank. Porsche 914. Is it still a Porsche if it makes you do a double take for all the wrong reasons? That was the reaction many had when they first laid eyes on the Porsche 914. Boxy, stubby, and unapologetically square, it looked more like a kit car built by engineers on a deadline than anything that belonged next to a 911. With its odd proportions, long rear quarters, and a cabin set so far forward it felt like you were driving from the hood, the 914 was a rolling contradiction, half Volkswagen, half Stuttgart. Ambition. Yet beneath the quirky sheet metal sat a bold idea, a mid-engine layout in an affordable, nimble chassis that could actually handle. It wasn't about brute speed or elegance. It was about balance and accessibility. The flat-4 engine didn't thrill, but it taught you to drive. And once you got over the looks, it was, surprisingly, fun. Sure, it never screamed poster car, but there's something strangely endearing about a sports car that never tried to be sexy. The 914 may not have aged gracefully, but it aged uniquely. And sometimes that's enough to make you fall in love with the misfit. There was a time when cars were packed with features so bizarre that they made sense only in their own weird little era. Some looked high-tech, others, pure marketing madness. But all of them shared one thing: they didn't age well. Buckle up as we take a ride through 20 useless old car features that faded into history, and for good reason. Pop-up headlights. Looking cool used to come with moving parts and just enough mechanical risk to keep things interesting. Hideaway headlights, also called pop-up headlights, were the automotive equivalent of a tuxedo with a secret lever. Sleek, dramatic, and undeniably cinematic, these retractable lights gave muscle cars and sports coupes an almost human swagger, like they were raising an eyebrow before burning rubber. While most people link them to the golden era of American muscle, the concept dates back to the 1936 Cord 810, which stunned crowds with its disappearing headlights at the New York Auto Show. Alfa Romeo followed the trend that same year, but it wasn't until 1962 that things really got flashy, thanks to the Lotus Elan and its electrically powered James Bond-style headlamp lifts. Of course, style came with strings attached. The motors were notoriously fussy. The lights sometimes refused to rise, or worse, got stuck mid-pop like a car caught mid-thought. Repairs were expensive, parts hard to source, and eventually regulations and cost concerns dimmed their appeal. By 2004, the last holdouts faded into the rearview mirror. LEDs and projector beams took the spotlight, leaving pop-up headlights as relics of a bolder, more theatrical era, when even your headlights knew how to make an entrance. Fender skirts. Could a car really look more aerodynamic just by hiding its rear wheels under a sheet of metal? Apparently, designers in the mid-20th century thought so, and the fender skirt was born. From the 1940s through the 60s, these curved metal covers, called spats in the UK and Australia, were bolted over the upper portion of a car's rear wheels. The idea was simple: create a clean, uninterrupted body line that made the car look longer, lower, and more luxurious. And for a while, it worked. Cars like the Cadillac DeVille and Chevy Impala floated down the road like yachts on white wall tires, with fender skirts acting like chrome-trimmed tuxedo cuffs. But beneath all that elegance was a glaring inconvenience. Need to change a tire? Good luck. Those skirts had to be removed first, often with tools, turning a roadside repair into a mini pit stop. And aside from aesthetics, they did little else. No speed advantage, no fuel savings, just pure visual drama. As the 1970s rolled in, drivers began trading flash for function. Fender skirts faded from the scene, though a few models like the Cadillac Eldorado clung to them until the mid-decade. Stylish? Sure. Practical? About as much as wearing dress shoes to mow the lawn. If you're finding this video interesting so far, just comment "interest" to let us know you're sticking around till the end. Vent windows. Before climate control turned cars into rolling refrigerators, there was a humble hero perched at the edge of every front door: the vent window. Small, triangular, and criminally underappreciated, these pivoting glass panels brought fresh air to sweaty drivers long before Freon became a household name. From the 1930s through the 1980s, vent windows were standard on everything from family sedans to pickup trucks. Crack one open, and you got a steady breeze without the roar of a full window drop, or the joy of rain soaking your left leg. Some folks even mastered the art of angling them just right to blow cigarette smoke clean out the car. Precision airflow, analog style. But as air conditioning took center stage and designers obsessed over sleeker silhouettes and tighter seals, the vent windows slowly disappeared. Automakers phased them out to save on production costs and improve aerodynamics, and by the 1990s, they were mostly gone. Still, classic car lovers haven't forgotten. In fact, some custom builders now go out of their way to add them back in. Why? Because there's something undeniably cool and deeply nostalgic about that little glass triangle swinging open like a chrome-trimmed wink from a simpler, breezier time. Voice alert systems. Ah yes, the golden age of talking cars, because nothing says luxury quite like being scolded by your own dashboard. In the 1980s, automakers decided that what drivers truly needed wasn't smoother handling or better mileage, but a robotic backseat driver embedded in the dash. Enter the voice alert system, an early attempt at in-car AI that sounded less like HAL 9000 and more like a speak and spell having a bad day. One of the earliest culprits was the Chrysler LeBaron, which greeted drivers with monotone announcements like,
"Your engine oil pressure is low,"
or the legendary "A door is ajar," a phrase that haunted road trips and confused children everywhere. The goal was noble: keep drivers informed without them having to glance away. But what started as a futuristic innovation quickly became a source of irritation, especially when the alerts repeated endlessly like a nagging co-pilot who couldn't be muted. As technology improved, these mechanical voices were phased out in favor of digital dashboards and intuitive icons. Still, they left behind a quirky legacy, proof that even well-intentioned tech can miss the mark. Today's sleek voice assistants owe a nod to these awkward pioneers that once tried, and mostly failed, to give cars a personality. Curb feelers. Curb feelers were the automotive equivalent of whiskers, twitchy little antennas that helped your car sense danger before it kissed the concrete. Back in the 50s and 60s, when chrome was king and white walls were sacred, these humble metal wires jutted out just above the wheels like tiny parking guardians, ready to scream via high-pitched scraping the moment you drifted too close to a curb. At the time, they made perfect sense. Drivers wanted to protect their prized hubcaps from scuffs, and parallel parking wasn't exactly an Olympic event most folks trained for. Curb feelers offered a primitive form of proximity alert, low-tech, but oddly effective. But the charm wore thin. The wires bent easily, rusted faster than a junkyard dog's collar, and eventually became more of an eyesore than a solution. While cars like the Cadillac DeVille wore them like functional jewelry, the reality was less glamorous. They helped, until they didn't. As auto tech marched forward, bringing parking sensors, backup cameras, and self-parking systems, the humble curb feeler clanked its way into obsolescence. Still, they remain a fascinating footnote in car history, a relic of a time when drivers relied on sound and instinct, not screens and sonar, to park with pride. Bench seats, front. Who needs personal space when you can cram 3 people across one continuous cushion? That was the everyday reality of the front bench seat, an unbroken stretch of padding that turned the front row into a shared experience, whether you liked it or not. Back in the mid-20th century, bench seats were everywhere. They offered simplicity, practicality, and enough room for mom, dad, and an unlucky sibling in the middle. For young couples, they doubled as date night real estate, with no console getting in the way of a flirtatious slide across the vinyl. But style and safety don't sit still. As European sports cars with bucket seats gained traction after World War II, American taste began to shift. Buckets felt sleeker, more personal, and worked better with center consoles, automatic transmissions, and emerging seatbelt regulations. By 2013, the Chevy Impala quietly retired the last front bench in an American sedan. Trucks held on longer, but even those are leaning bucket these days. Interestingly, in the earliest Chevrolets, you didn't choose between bench and bucket. The bench was your only option. It's a detail that speaks volumes about the era. One seat, one family, one wide ride. A design born of togetherness, now replaced by cup holders and armrests of solitude. If this video brought back some memories, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to support our channel. CD changers. I still remember the satisfying clunk of the disc carousel spinning in the trunk, like your car was thoughtfully flipping through albums before deciding which one to play next. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, the CD changer was the ultimate road trip flex. Forget fumbling with single discs. These systems let you load 6, 10, even a dozen CDs at once, tucked neatly into a magazine-style tray hidden under the seat or back in the trunk. With just a press of a dashboard button, you could jump from Nirvana to Nat King Cole without ever taking your eyes off the road. At home, some stereo systems could hold up to 400 discs, turning entire music collections into spin-and-play libraries. But despite their high-tech image at the time, CD changers weren't immune to hiccups. Carousels jammed, discs misread, and God help you if it shuffled into track 17 of a live bootleg. Still, there was something undeniably personal about them. You chose those discs. You built that sequence. And for a little while, your car wasn't just a vehicle. It was your rolling, spinning, clicking soundtrack to life. Now they're gone. But for many of us, those discs still echo. Hidden fuel fillers. Was there anything cooler than pulling into a gas station, flipping down your license plate, and watching confused onlookers try to figure out where your fuel cap had gone? In the 1940s and 50s, car makers began hiding gas fillers in the most unexpected places, not for performance, but purely for style. Cadillac's 1941 Series 62 was among the first to tuck its fuel cap behind the taillight, setting a trend that Chrysler, Oldsmobile, and Nash quickly followed. Some designs required lifting a hinged taillight. Others used clever pop-outs that felt more like secret compartments than automotive necessities. As the decades rolled on, the license plate trick took center stage. Ford and GM popularized the flip-down rear plate design, which became something of a signature move for American cars in the 1960s and 70s. The 1964 Thunderbird nailed the look, bold, sleek, and just a little bit mischievous. But for all its charm, the design wasn't perfect. Fueling could be awkward, messy, and occasionally damaging. Once center rear fuel fillers were banned for safety reasons, the fad faded fast. Still, that little hidden cap remains a beloved memory for many, a clever flourish from a time when even pumping gas was treated like part of the show. Not practical maybe, but definitely unforgettable. Highway hi-fi. Somewhere between the golden age of big band radio and the dawn of cassette tapes, Chrysler decided what your morning commute really needed was a vinyl record player under the dash. In 1956, the Highway Hi-Fi made its debut as an optional add-on for Chrysler, DeSoto, Dodge, and Plymouth models. It didn't use standard LPs or 45s. Instead, it spun special 7-inch records at an odd 16 2/3 RPM, a speed chosen specifically to squeeze out nearly an hour of music per side. These weren't your typical store-bought albums either. Chrysler partnered exclusively with Columbia Records, offering curated collections of orchestral tunes, Broadway soundtracks, and CBS historical broadcasts. Basically, your dad's dream road trip playlist. But for all its novelty, the system was far from perfect. The record player didn't love bumpy roads, skipping was common, the sound quality was inconsistent, and the unit itself cost about $200, a small fortune in the Eisenhower era. Plus, it only played proprietary records, so no slipping in your own favorites. Still, it holds the honor of being the very first in-car audio system tied directly to a record label. Brief, flawed, and totally impractical, it was also brilliant in its own retro way. For a fleeting moment, Chrysler gave drivers vinyl dreams on four wheels. Opera windows. What happens when car designers run out of ideas but still want to charge extra? You get the opera window, a design flourish that tried its best to whisper luxury, but mostly screamed, "Why?" From the early 1970s to the mid-1980s, these petite, oval or round rear-side windows became a status symbol on American land yachts. You'd find them tucked into the vinyl roofs of Lincoln Continentals, Cadillac Sevilles, and Chrysler New Yorkers, sitting there like little monocles, offering a view of absolutely nothing. They weren't for visibility, ventilation, or safety. They were just there. Decorative fluff dressed up as prestige. Manufacturers pitched them as reminiscent of box seats at the opera, hence the name, but in reality, they were more costume than function. Over time, their presence became less of a style statement and more of a design cliché, often undermined by poor ceiling and frame rattles that added background noise to your symphony of V8 rumble. As automotive design moved toward cleaner, more aerodynamic lines in the late 80s, opera windows were quietly phased out. And just like that, one of the most unnecessary yet oddly memorable car features took its final bow, leaving behind only trim outlines and some rain-stained regrets. Ashtrays and cigarette lighters. Lighting up in a car was once as routine as adjusting the rearview mirror. For decades, ashtrays and cigarette lighters weren't just standard. They were expected, like seatbelts you didn't bother using. By the 1950s, cars came with ashtrays in every door and lighters so reliable they could ignite a lucky strike during a snowstorm. These weren't afterthoughts. They were proudly engineered features. Some luxury models even had illuminated ashtrays and lighters that popped out like mini toasters, ready to serve your nicotine needs at a moment's notice. Cigarette culture wasn't just accepted. It was built into the dashboard. But as public health campaigns gained ground and smoking began its slow exit from the mainstream, these once iconic fixtures started to vanish. In 1994, Chrysler was the first to pull the plug, quietly removing ashtrays as a standard feature. Other automakers followed suit, trading the puff for practicality. Ironically, the humble cigarette lighter socket found new life as the 12-volt power outlet, a relic repurposed for phone chargers, GPS units, and eventually portable espresso machines. The ashtrays, though? They faded into dusty obsolescence, remembered mostly by mechanics and old-school smokers. Proof that not every classic car feature ages as well as a fine cigar. Swivel bucket seats. Ever wish your car seat could spin around like a game show contestant's chair? Well, once upon a groovy time, it actually could. In the late 1950s, automakers, clearly chasing comfort and a flair for the dramatic, introduced swivel seats, giving drivers the ability to pirouette into their ride with the grace of a Broadway dancer. General Motors leaned into this novelty through the 60s and 70s, particularly in models like the Chevy Monte Carlo and Oldsmobile Cutlass. The idea? Make entering and exiting your car feel less like a yoga pose and more like sliding into a booth at a diner. And for a brief, glorious moment, it worked. The seats rotated smoothly, added a dash of style, and made valet parking feel like theater. But like most clever gimmicks, this one spun out of favor. The swivel mechanism was mechanically fussy, often broke, and gobbled up interior space. Passengers complained of feeling unstable, like riding in an office chair on wheels during a sharp turn. By the late 70s, practicality pulled rank, and the spinning seat took its final bow. Chrysler gave it a short-lived encore in the 2000s with the Swivel and Go, but once again, utility won out. Turns out, comfort alone doesn't keep you on the road. Vibrasonic sound system. Some car features were born from brilliance. Others, pure boredom in the design lab. Take General Motors' short-lived obsession with turning your Buick into a bargain bin concert hall, the Vibrasonic sound system. Rolled out in the late 1950s, it promised to wrap your music in lush, echoing reverb, the kind you'd expect in a cathedral, or maybe a tiled bathroom. The idea was to elevate in-car audio beyond the flat crackle of AM radio, so GM fitted cars with amps and carefully placed reflectors to bounce sound around like a garage band with a god complex. At first, it felt fancy. Every song sounded like it was echoing through eternity. But then came the practical problems. Conversations became a mess, radio voices got distorted, and the reverb quickly turned from rich to ridiculous. As if that weren't enough, the system was a nightmare to install. Panels shook, sound quality dipped, and drivers started to miss plain old silence. Interestingly, GM wasn't the only one chasing this illusion. Decades later, Toyota briefly added reverb switches to some 80s models, proving bad ideas have a long shelf life. By 1965, Vibrasonic quietly vanished, leaving behind a legacy that proves not every innovation needs an echo. Push-button transmissions. In the age of tail fins and space races, even shifting gears had to feel futuristic. So Chrysler, never shy about mixing flair with function, rolled out its push-button automatic transmission in 1956, a bold attempt to trade levers for logic. Instead of the standard column or floor shifter, drivers were greeted with a row of buttons mounted on the dashboard, inviting them to drive at the tap of a finger. The early PowerFlight 2-speed system later gave way to the more capable 3-speed TorqueFlight, but the visual gimmick stayed the same. Chrysler proudly marketed it as sleek, modern, and especially appealing to women, because apparently pressing buttons was less intimidating than moving a stick. At first, the idea turned heads. For some, it felt like piloting a spacecraft, but novelty doesn't always equal practicality. The buttons could jam, were awkwardly positioned, and often made simple driving feel like decoding a keypad. Repairs were a nightmare, and mechanics cursed the system's finicky internals. Eventually, by the mid-1960s, simplicity reclaimed the spotlight. Chrysler phased it out, and other automakers followed suit. What started as a design from tomorrow became just another artifact from a time when even gear selection was dressed in chrome and ambition. Manual window cranks. Long before power windows became standard, every driver knew the rhythmic wrist twist needed to lower a window. It was simple, mechanical, and refreshingly human. No electronics, no motors, just gears, muscle, and maybe a touch of elbow grease if the window got sticky in summer. They were built into just about everything from humble hatchbacks to full-size sedans, a standard feature for decades. But as car tech evolved, so did our tolerance for effort. Power windows became the new normal, and by the early 2000s, the crank began its slow fade. Even holdouts like the Jeep Wrangler, famous for keeping things analog, finally dropped manual windows in 2025, quietly closing the chapter on one of the last fully mechanical interfaces in modern cars. Still, there's something nostalgic about rolling down a window that actually rolls. It reminded us we were part of the machine, not just passengers in a mobile living room. Today, the crank survives mostly in memory, and maybe a few farm trucks, stuck somewhere between retro charm and you're kidding, right? Automatic seatbelts. What could possibly go wrong with a seatbelt that strangles you the moment you shut the door? In the late 1970s, car makers thought they had cracked the code to saving lives by removing human decision-making entirely. Thus came the automatic seatbelt, part safety device, part haunted marionette. These motorized belts slid along rails, sweeping dramatically across your chest like a slow-motion karate chop. The goal: increase seatbelt usage without depending on forgetful drivers. It sort of worked, until it didn't. Many people still ignored the separate lap belt, defeating the whole purpose. One version even attached to the door itself, forcing passengers to awkwardly dodge the belt just to sit down. Safety, it turns out, shouldn't require acrobatics. This strange chapter in automotive design gained steam after the Carter administration pushed for passive restraints or airbags in all cars. Fun fact, by 1983, fewer than 15% of Americans regularly wore seatbelts, so automatic systems felt like a necessary shortcut. But the magic wore off quickly. The belts were finicky, inconvenient, and prone to jamming. By the mid-90s, airbags took center stage, offering better protection with far less drama. And just like that, the auto-strangling seatbelt slinked into history, unclipped and unloved. Which one of these features made you laugh or made you go, "Wait, that was real?" Tell us which one surprised you the most in the comments. Cassette players. Cassette players didn't just play music, they rewound our frustrations one tangled ribbon at a time. In the golden age of mixtapes and mullets, these clunky yet beloved devices reigned supreme on dashboards across America. Starting in the early 1970s, they gave drivers something no radio station ever could: total control over the vibe. Suddenly, your car could be a rolling concert hall, or more often, a scratchy echo chamber of a bootleg Bon Jovi tape. As automakers leaned into the trend, brands like Blaupunkt and Pioneer made cassette decks a luxury item. By the 1980s, they were everywhere, enhanced by features like auto reverse, Dolby noise reduction, and fast-forward buttons that seemed to never stop exactly where you wanted. Still, they were adored. People curated road trip playlists with near-religious devotion, creating emotional time capsules wrapped in plastic and magnetic tape. And here's a fun twist. One of the best-selling car audio accessories of the 90s wasn't even a cassette. It was the cassette adapter, which let you connect a CD player or iPod through your tape deck. Ironic, right? Eventually, CDs and digital audio elbowed the cassette into retirement, but for a generation, nothing said freedom quite like a dashboard full of tapes and the eternal quest for the perfect side A. Floor-mounted dimmer witches. Do you remember when adjusting your headlights meant performing a dance move with your ankle? Because apparently, in the 1930s, engineers decided your left foot wasn't busy enough. Starting around 1927, automakers began relocating the headlight dimmer switch from the dashboard to the floor, allowing drivers to control high and low beams with a simple tap of the foot. On paper, it sounded efficient. Keep your hands on the wheel and let your feet multitask. But in practice, it often felt like playing a round of vehicular twister, especially at night, in the rain, on unfamiliar roads. Brands like Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler all embraced the design, despite the growing chorus of drivers who found it, at best, inconvenient, and at worst, a safety hazard. Taking your foot off the gas just to see better? Not exactly an ideal trade-off. Eventually, common sense caught up with innovation. By the 1970s, the dimmer switch had returned to its rightful place on the steering column, joining the turn signal lever and giving drivers one less reason to fumble with their footwear. Car phones. Slap an antenna on the roof, bury a shoebox-sized transceiver under the seat, and congratulations, you were officially driving a phone booth on wheels. In the 1980s, car phones weren't just about staying connected. They were rolling declarations of wealth and ambition. Massive, clunky, and wired straight into the vehicle's electrical system, they made everyday driving feel like a high-stakes business call, assuming you could get a signal. The technology had roots going back to 1946, when the Bell system debuted the first mobile telephone service in St. Louis. That early setup weighed a whopping 80 pounds, and operated with only 3 shared channels citywide. Yet somehow, it ignited a global trend, inspiring mobile networks from Finland to Scandinavia and beyond. By the mid-'80s, car phones had reached peak prestige, but despite the image boost, the experience itself was rough. Static-filled conversations, dead zones, and a heating unit that could roast your coffee. Then came the 1990s, bringing smaller, smarter handheld phones with them. Consumers happily ditched dashboard dialing for something that actually worked. Today, the car phone is little more than a relic, proof that being first isn't always the same as being good. But man, did it look impressive while it lasted. They may be banned, buried, or just best forgotten, but each of these cars left a dent in history. Which one surprised you most? Let us know below, and if you enjoyed the ride, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss a trip down memory lane.